welcome back to Dukascopy TV. Now, despite being against record unemployment figures and slow economic growth, Barack Obama has been voted again to be President of the United States. And I'm joined in the studio by John Hancock from the World Trade Organization to talk about these events, as well as what's going to be happening in the next 4 years. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, do you think the results that we've seen today, is this what the American people were expecting?
Actually, I don't know. I think Americans were hungry for an agenda. They were hungry for specifics. They were hungry for anything that looked like a solution to these giant problems that you described facing America. And I don't think this election gave them that. I think both candidates decided fairly early on in the process that they'd be murdered, they'd be destroyed for being honest or truthful about the big problems facing the United States, the fiscal cliff, the problem with taxation, the unemployment situation, the imperial overstretch. So they dodged these issues, they ducked them, and the electorate didn't get the specifics they were hoping to get in these giant debates. And in ducking the issues, you're left with an election that's produced really no agenda, no obvious mandate, no plan. I think what's most striking about the election is, despite the media's claims that it was a hugely ideological contest and stark policy differences, and despite the heated rhetoric, in fact, both candidates were pretty vague on policy, if policies existed, and they weren't that different on the major issues. There wasn't this huge gulf. I can definitely
agree on that. I think we saw them agree on many different aspects that usually you would expect them to argue against, but...
No, they didn't. And where there were differences, they were very unspecific and certainly avoiding truthful answers.
So I was going to ask you about why you think that President Obama has pipped his opponent Mitt Romney to the post. What of his principles do you think that really pushed him over the edge to become president again?
That's a good question. I don't actually think this election was, when you see it through the lens of the day after, about policy so much as about identity and symbolism. I think a lot of voters voted for the candidate they thought was like them, or that stood for them, or had some kind of emotional or identity appeal. And it's probably sadly reflected in the numbers. Obama came out of this election with substantial support amongst women, with overwhelming support amongst Latinos and African Americans. Romney, on the other hand, came out with a large lead amongst white voters. I think something like 60% of white voters for Romney, and 1 in 2 white males voted for Romney. 38% of whites voted for Obama. That's probably the lowest ever in a U.S. election, except when Walter Mondale lost to Ronald Reagan in his sweep. So this shows a polarized electorate, an electorate that's increasingly divided along identity lines, which is maybe something to be concerned about.
So John, just lastly, Obama has made history before, and he's done it again. He's only the second Democratic president to be voted into a second term of presidency. So what do you think we should expect from this second term?
Boy, that's another question. I'm going to be sounding very pessimistic today, so maybe I should try to end on a higher note. Look, he won a second term. But you look at the numbers, and it was a very slender margin. He won against McCain in 2008 with a difference of about 7% of the vote. I think he was somewhere around 55% of the popular vote. He's not at 7% this election, he's at 0.7% in this election. Some of the big battleground states like Florida were won by razor-thin margins. So this is not an election that's produced an overwhelming mandate for Barack Obama. And of course, Romney lost. The Republicans have lost. They didn't win the Senate. Democrats still control the Senate. Democrats still control the presidency. Republicans control the House. So in many ways, we've had an election where voters voted for yesterday. I mean, it looks a lot like the situation that prevailed over the last years and months prior to this election. If you dig deeper, America's a divided country. It's divided by income, it's divided by race, it's divided by ethnicity, it's divided by religion and spirituality, it's divided by gender, it's deeply divided by partisan politics. And it's hard to expect a president coming out of an election like this. It's hard to expect a shared, broad, common mandate when you can't find that commonality, that sense of shared will amongst the electorate. So we've got a gridlocked Washington probably in the future because we have a gridlocked and divided United States.
Well, John, thank you very much for coming into the studio and sharing your insights with us today. But we're going to go on now to our Dukascopy question. We ask every guest that comes in, if you had $1 million to put in the market for 1 year, where would you put it and why? So these are your options.
Wow, that's a tough question. Given those choices, I'd put my $1 million into cash. I think for a lot of the reasons we discussed, the American economic outlook's uncertain right now. At best, these employment figures are not remarkable. They are actually, at this point in the cycle, bad news. The United States has been stuck at 8% unemployment for 4 years now. The recent GDP figures, which were trumpeted by the Obama campaign, 2% growth at this point in the cycle, that's not remarkable. And if you factor out government spending, it's more like 1.3%. And the global economic picture is probably even more uncertain, even worse. Uncertainty about China right now and slowing growth, deeply slowing growth in India. Japan's debt crisis is infinitely, well, not infinitely, but considerably worse than the American situation. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there. I think cash is king. I'd put my $1 million in cash.
Cash is king. Well, thank you, John, for coming in and sharing your insights again.
Thanks for having me.
That's it from us in the studio, but just click back to the website for more interviews and updates. Take care.